This is John McAllister. Welcome to episode 12 of the Setting Trick podcast. Today, we have ACBL Hall of Famer Bart Bramley, who is on at the suggestion of a listener who sent me a great introductory email to Bart, which included a list of potential questions and stories. And as the host of this podcast, I can't tell you how exciting it is to get that kind of email. So thank you to Phil Clayton for introducing the idea of Bart being a guest on the show. Bart did not disappoint. He does not disappoint. This is our longest episode, and that's just because we were having so much fun talking. There's also a couple of firsts here. We have our first tail of the tape. If you want to know Bart's or my height and weight, you're in luck. That's coming to you. Finally, we don't have any sponsors on the Setting Trick podcast, so I decided that I wanted to share something with you all before we get to Bart about something that's impacted my life practicing. I came across the book, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, thanks to Tim Ferriss, whose podcast has also inspired me to start the Setting Trick. And Tim sends out a thing called 5 Bullet Friday. And one 5 Bullet Friday, I read about a book called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. So I bought it, and one of the commitments is a commitment to not gossip. And that includes not only not speaking about another person in a way that you wouldn't if that person were in your presence, but it also includes not listening to gossip. And one of the things that this commitment has done is it has really made me appreciate how much I was willing to gossip previously. So that's a godsend. It's been a godsend for me to quit that and to see it and to stop it. And it's also been really hard to hear other people speak in what I would consider to be gossipy ways. And so I'm just going to ask you, as a listener, to consider next time when you're speaking about somebody who's not there, just to wonder if you would be saying that in the same way if they were in fact in your presence. So that's it. That's the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. It's published by the Conscious Leadership Group, and I highly recommend the book. And now let's get to my conversation with Bart. Bart.
Yes.
Oh, shit. I had you on speakerphone.
Okay, now, before we get going, I sent Michael a list of topics with a little information about all of them. Did he forward that to you?
I got that after I had emailed you this afternoon. So yes, I do have that.
Okay, good. So I don't know who else you talked to, but I'm ready to roll.
I talked to George Middleman. I spoke to him on the phone last night. George is a former partner of mine, and asked him about the World Par Contest because that was in your email.
He's still trying to get dinner from me.
He is. He said that. I wasn't going to bring it up, but he said that you owe him dinner.
Well, then he's hard to please because I invited him to the Hall of Fame banquet, which is a dinner. And then later in the Vegas tournament, we were both up, at around 1 a.m, and he suggested getting something to eat. So I bought.
I guess he it's funny because he said you bought him breakfast.
Well, yes, but it was at 1 a.m. Breakfast is my favorite meal. I have it as often as possible. And the when the tournaments are in the gambling places like Vegas, and a long time ago they had one they've had them in Reno, they had one in Atlantic City. So since there's 24-hour food in most of those places, if I get in the groove on my schedule, I have 2 meals a day, one at about 1 or 2 in the morning, and another one in the middle of the afternoon if I'm on a team where that's my time off, and I have breakfast at both meals.
So that's how you weigh 125 pounds? Is that what you...
Well, I don't eat as much as most people, although on occasion I can pack it in. I get bored, and I'm a very slow eater, so I tend to just run out of energy to eat after a while, and I give up.
Yeah, that's...
But I've surprised people on occasion. If you cook me a nice meal, I'll eat it. But I'm not... this is another thing that happened in college, where I was very self-conscious until halfway through college, because I've always been thin, and I didn't grow as soon as some people, so I was small in addition to being thin, and I was very embarrassed about it. And halfway through college, I looked around and noticed that everybody else was trying to lose weight. I said, wait a second, what am I worried about here? I'm ahead of this game, and I haven't worried about it since then. So I thought that, like most people, I would gain weight gradually over the course of my life, but hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like maybe I didn't have to say. You sent me the notes, or Michael had the notes, which said your exact weight in it. So we certainly can take that out of there if you'd rather not it be a matter of public knowledge.
As I said, I don't care. I went from being embarrassed about it to being proud of it.
Right. Well, how tall are you? I forget.
5'10".
5'10",
$1.25. And well, although I had a recent, I think in my most recent doctor's appointment, I avoid doctors generally, but I think they measured me at only 5'9", which is distressing because I've always been 5'10".
So how often do you weigh yourself if you don't care?
I don't know, every few months, just to see if anything's changed. See if I'm at the low end or the high end of my range. Recently, I've been more at the low end, which is like 122. But like anybody else, I've ticked 130 a few times in my life, and when that happens, I don't feel right. My pants get tight, and I consciously try to eat a little bit less so that doesn't happen anymore. It's not hard for me. But I'm aware of it. I mean, for the first 10 or 15 years after college, I expected to start gaining weight. But once it didn't happen for a number of years, I said, gee, maybe it's not going to happen. Okay.
Yeah.
And for a few years after college, I was very conscious of staying at my weight in case I got called for another draft physical.
Yeah, you mentioned that you were able
to go on a diet at any time to get down to 120.
How much time? What was the turnaround time when you?
I graduated 50 years ago in June of '69, and I got my draft notice. It's been a few weeks, but I had a month. And at MIT, there was a woman, Mrs. Lutz, who headed the Department of the Selective Service. So before Vietnam, she just had mundane paperwork to do for students who had some interaction with the draft, which was always mundane. But during my era, that became important. Now, I knew about Mrs. Lutz as soon as I got there because since my father was a veteran and he died young, they very nicely gave him and his family disability benefits because they claimed that his heart problems were caused in part by his service. I don't think that was true, but they said it was true. So I went to visit Mrs. Lutz as soon as I got there to do some paperwork for the benefits I was receiving through my father. So I knew where her office was, and when spring of my senior year came around, I went to the office, checked the manuals there, looked up the height and weight table. Now, if the cutoff for my height was, say, 112, forget it. When I discovered it was 123, and that was only 2 pounds away, I said, well, this is too close to not to do it. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So I went on a diet.
Wow.
So I have a funny story about my diet month. So, one of those, somewhere in there, I went out with a friend of mine who was in my class, although he had fallen behind because he had problems, both mental and social, and but he was a big fella. When he got to college at the age of 15, he was 6 feet tall and weighed 3 1/4. And he was still, I think he was even bigger by the time the summer of my graduating year came around. But he was still in town. So we went out to dinner one night, and he ordered a meal, and I ordered a salad. And he took great delight in pointing out to the waitress, he's on a diet.
To which the waitress responded?
No, she took it in stride. The various women in my life, throughout my life, have all tried to fatten me up to no avail. People ask me with great regularity, "Have you lost weight?" And no, I haven't. This is how I am. So my brother is also very thin, but not nearly like I am. He's 2 inches taller, but weighs 25 pounds more. So he's still quite thin. But
a strapping, 6
by my
feet tall,
standards,
and
yeah,
148.
150. Yeah.
I was 6'1", 143, I think, my freshman year. At the beginning of the summer of my freshman year of high school. After my freshman year of high school.
Wow.
Yeah. So I used to be very thin, and then I've gone the other direction as well. My peak was 273 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, what are you right now? Like 185?
No. The last time I weighed myself, I was wearing my gym clothes and basketball shoes, and I weighed 232.
Really? Okay. Well, are you still 6'1"? Are you taller?
No. I'm like I am 6'4" and a half, maybe 3/4.
And a half. Okay.
Yeah, probably 4.5.
Okay. Well, so 230 is not bad.
No. It's not. No. I mean, but I'm conscious of my weight. Like it definitely is something that I mean, what you're talking about is you're talking about something that has certainly challenges me. I mean, it challenges me daily.
Yeah, well, it challenges most people daily.
Yeah.
I know I'm lucky. It's never been a problem for me. Whatever I want, as much as I want. But luckily, it's not that much. I love sweet stuff. I eat tons of it almost every day. Yeah, it's lucky. It's lucky.
And all this time, I thought my first question was going to be something completely different.
Yeah. Now, I was also self-conscious when I was young about my hair. Now, I don't have nearly as much as I once did, but it's very curly. And hairstyles were short when I was young, and I was very self-conscious that my hair wasn't like anybody else's. I couldn't make it look like anybody else's. So I was self-conscious about that, and I couldn't part it. I thought you're supposed to part your hair. I had no idea what to do. It wasn't until I got to college and the hairstyles got longer, and I let my hair grow out. And I think it was in my junior year, it finally got long enough that I could feel it. I could shake it, feel it move. It's very tight. It's tight curls. I mean, it's hard to tell that now because it's all gone on top. But people with normal soft hair have had that sensation all their lives. Even when it's short, you can feel it move. But I had to grow mine pretty long before I could feel it, and then I loved it. I've been a fan of long hair ever since. And even now, when I look pretty silly when I grow it out, I look like Clarabelle, but I don't care. I love the look of long hair on anybody. The big fros from back then, they're great. I was very sad that they went out of style, but I love it when I see one. And I had a Jew fro. So yeah, and I got pictures to prove it, where it's way out there.
Well, I thought that my first question, since you've worked with Bob for 20 years, Bob Hammond, for those who don't know, is
yes, I've known Bob for almost 50 years.
50 years. Yes,
from the early 70s, and I know that he has known me since at least 1973, when I beat him in the Spingold. That was the first great year of my bridge career. In the Vanderbilt that year, in the round of 64, my team beat a very good team that included Ron Smith, Black Ron Smith.
Yeah.
He had a strong team from St. Louis. It was close all the way, and we beat him. I was playing with Mark Feldman.
Yeah, I know Mark.
One of my college buddies, and two guys from Connecticut and Westchester, Steve Labens and Chuck Lamprey, a regular pair at the time, a fine pair. And then in the next round, we got the Reisinger winners, which included Lou Bloom, later a partner of mine. It was close all the way, and we beat them. And that got us in the round of 16 the Spingold winners, which included young Mike Becker playing with Andy Bernstein, who doesn't play much anymore, and Jeff Rubens of the Bridge World playing with B.J. Becker. It was close all the way, and we beat them. So those were three good wins, and that got us Kaplan and Kay, and George Rapay and Bill Grieve. Probably don't know him, but George Rapay is a famous player. And Murray and Kahila. That was our round of 8. So we led at halftime, and then the roof caved in, and they beat us. But if we'd beaten them in the semis, we would have gotten the aces. And finally, if we had beaten the aces, we would have had a soft draw in the final. So I learned in that one tournament that I could win these events because I'd beaten 3 good teams and gave a scare to another very good team. Then in the summer, playing with Lou Reich, another college buddy, and our teammates were Bob Ewan, the guy that wrote the original book on opening leads, and he was playing with one of my dear friends, Merle Tom. Our earlier matches were easier than in the spring, but in the round of 16 we got the aces, and we beat them. It was close all the way, and we beat them. So Bob tells a story about that match where let's see, the other table finished first. My table finished first, and Bob was playing my teammates. And we had a decent game, but we knew it was going to be close. So Bob came out, and one of his teammates rushed up to him and said, what'd you do on the last board? And Bob said, well, we beat a part, scored 3 tricks. And his teammate said, so Bob thought this was good. His teammate said, lose by 8. So that's Bob's recollection of that match. But he knew who I was at that point, and we saw each other regularly, since we both went to lots of bridge tournaments. And our first encounter as partners was a fluke. It was in 1990, and at the Nationals were in Fort Worth. So this was a bittersweet tournament for me. The year before, playing with Lou Bloom, my first truly great partner, we had won the Vanderbilt on a team with Ronnie Rubin and Mike Becker and Bobby Levin and Peter Weichsel. That was a good team. And we played great, and Lou Bloom and I played great, but everybody played great, and we won. And then 2 months later, Lou Bloom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. So he was 49 at the time. So for most people at that time, and even today, I think, that was a death sentence, and we all knew it. So our team stayed together, but in the summer we were discombobulated and didn't play well and didn't do well. And in the fall, it was the same. And Lou hung in there longer than most people I've ever known personally that had pancreatic cancer. And he was still around the following spring. And his doctor gave him permission to, he had been living in Atlanta, but when he got really sick, he moved to the Nashville area where Tommy Sanders, who was a great player and Lou's previous regular partner, but then Tommy got into bridge politics, and they ended their partnership because Tommy couldn't play as much as he had been playing. But they were still friends. And Tommy knew of an experimental cancer hospital in the Nashville area, and he encouraged Lou to come up to Nashville. And so Lou did that, and for the last several months of his life, he alternated between that hospital and Tommy's home. So I went to visit him in February of 1990, knowing that it was grim. And I saw him in the hospital, and each time I saw him during his illness, he looked better than I expected him to look, throughout this devastating illness. So I saw him there, and I remember we watched Shaquille O'Neal playing college basketball as a freshman at LSU. Lou Bloom was a huge college hoops fan. And at some point I went to find Lou's doctor, and I asked, this was about a month before the Nationals, I asked him a simple question. If Lou is the same in a month as he is today, would you let him go to Fort Worth to play bridge? And the doctor said yes. But he warned me that while he might be able to make the trip, not to expect a whole lot from his bridge game because he was gravely ill. And I said, that's okay. And so I went back and talked to Lou and told him what the doctor had told me, and he rallied. I think he had been willing himself to stay alive this whole time so we could defend. And he got himself to Fort Worth, and he was very weak by then. So we only played the first and third quarters. He needed rest. And it was all he could do. But he played great.
Wow.
and the whole team played great. The team rose to the occasion, and we won match after match.
Oh, my goodness.
Until we got to the semifinals, which happened to be Lou's 50th birthday.
Oh.
And we played against a team headed by Simone Deutsch, and we didn't have it that day. Although Lou continued to play great, but the rest of the team didn't, and they beat us. If we had played as well as he did that day, we would have won that match also. But we lost. And on his birthday. But still, we exceeded expectations by a huge margin.
Yeah,
it was
sure.
A great performance. And as luck would have it, the other finalist was a team that included Tommy Sanders. So we had lost on a Thursday. So on the Friday, there was a big Viewgraph show, and Lou was in a wheelchair by this time. So, I wheeled him over to watch the Viewgraph show all day while we rooted for Tommy Sanders, who won.
Wow. Tommy Sanders sounds like a good friend to Lou. I want to go back to where he what was their relationship before Lou came to Nashville? Were they partners?
Well, they had been Lou had 3 great partners in his career. The first one was Steve Goldberg, who passed away a few years ago. He was in Vegas at the time. So they played for a few years and won the Reisinger in 72 and the Spingold in 74. That was a famous event in New York City, but that's a whole story in itself. And then a few years later, Lou started playing with Tommy Sanders, and they won a whole bunch of events, several national knockouts. I think they won the LM pairs. I think they won the Cavendish pairs. But at some point in the early 80s, they stopped playing when Tommy got big into bridge politics.
Mm. Oh, right. That was the one. Okay, gotcha.
And I lucked into playing with Lou because it was at the 84 Spring Nationals when I'd been playing with someone else all week. And at the end of the week, at that time, the big event at the end of the tournament was the 2-day open pairs, which was the major pair event at the Spring Nationals. That's the one that Barry Crane won, 8 or 10 times.
Mm.
And suddenly I was on the loose for the weekend. So I was moping around in the lobby when I ran to, this was in San Antonio. So I ran into Mark Lair and David Berkowitz. And I was bemoaning my fate. They told me, Lou's not playing. He wants to watch March Madness, his other favorite thing besides bridge.
Yeah.
So give him a call. Maybe he'll play. So I called him up, and he was reluctant, but he said okay because he did love to play bridge, and he was at a bridge national. So we played, and we filled out a card in my typical style. I pride myself on being able to fill out a card with anybody in 10 minutes. I start at the back, opening leads, and I work backwards because the two of the most important things to cover are defense, carding, and Blackwood. I want to make sure we have both of those things down. And then once I started doing that, I figured, all right, let's just keep going in that direction. We'll finish up with the last thing we'll look at is no trump structure, which is what most people get bogged down in, and which is one of the least important things to worry about. You can do two-way statement if you don't have any time. So we filled out the card, and we played, and we were thoroughly mediocre in the first session and worse in the second session, but luckily we qualified somehow. Okay, and then the next day was magic. We crushed them in both sessions and won the event.
Wow.
And we knew we had a chance when, back in those days it wasn't electronic scoring, but when we looked at the scores after the second session and you could eyeball them when they put up what they call burner sheets, we knew that Barry Crane, was in contention, but we were ahead of him. And sure enough, if you beat Barry Crane, you're supposed to win. So we were first, and he was second. okay. So that was fantastic. That was.
Did Barry ever play teams?
Actually, yes, from time to time. So this is typical of my my style here. I have a lot of tangents, but I'm pretty good at keeping all the threads alive. So I'll get back to the main point eventually, which I remember is Bob Hammond. But in the meantime, let's finish up the Lou Bloom story.
Yeah.
So we won the National Open pairs, and so I was ecstatic, and I was aware that Lou didn't seem to have a regular partner at the time. But I had to pester him for a year before he agreed to play with me again, which was the Spring Nationals of '85, where we agreed to play in the Vanderbilt. So in '84, we played my system, the 10-minute system.
Yeah.
In '85, when we had a month to get ready, he said, "I'll send you the notes." So he sends me the notes, and it's like 75 pages. Ugh. I read through it, and I hate it. He has like 100 different ways to sign off and 4 of a minor. In my own methods, I have 0. And lots of other things that I don't like. Things that are internally inconsistent. Where he's got a whole system and he's the scribe. He's put it all together. So I appreciate that work. So I resisted some, but I agreed to play it because he'd done it. And then we did it really well in the Vanderbilt. So we cemented the idea of continuing to play because we had a good thing going. We had a great run to the semifinals and lost a classic heartbreaker to a team with Meckwell on it, where it was decided on the last board. But then we played basically every national between then and when he died.
This wasn't Washington, D.C., '85 when Meckwell, when the kidnapping took place, was it?
That was in '84.
That was in '84.
Right. I was not playing with him at that tournament. But I did have a win at that tournament. That was another one of my all-time favorite tournaments. There was the kidnapping scandal, and I won the 2-day Swiss at the end of the tournament, playing with Mark Cohen and Ralph Katz and Milt Rosenberg, who was Ralph's regular partner at the time. And anyway, unlike most events I've played, and that I think that most people have the same problem here, you remember the bad hands. You remember the hands you could have done better. But that tournament that we won, I remember the good hands, and there were lots of them. So when I started playing with Lou Bloom again, we did well. We had another heartbreaking loss in the finals of the Spingold in '86. We had a first and a second at the Fall Nationals in '87, and then we started playing regularly on the Rubin and Becker team. And that's right. We were.
So were any of these teams that you've been talking about, were there sponsors on any of the teams that you're talking about, the ones that you were on?
Rubin and Becker were sponsors. They made a lot of money in options and financed the team.
So Rubin, the guy, what's Rubin's first name?
Ron Rubin.
Rubin.
Yeah, so Mike Becker's been on both sides of the fence. He's always been a terrific player, but when he suddenly had a lot of money, he got teams with the people he really wanted to play with. And Ron Rubin is also a terrific player, although not in Mike's class, in my opinion.
Yeah.
We had been having good results, so they hired us. And the other pair was Bobby Levin and Peter Weichsel.
Right.
So we had a heartbreaking loss in the Spingold in 1988, and then we won the Vanderbilt in '89, and then Lou got sick. And it was brutal. So now we'd had this semifinal loss in Fort Worth in 1990, and
on his birthday.
On his birthday, on a Thursday. On the Friday, we watched Tommy Sanders win the Vanderbilt. And then Tommy, instead of sticking around for the last 2 days, where there was a 2-day Swiss at that time, was going to take Lou home to Nashville. And I met him on Saturday morning and to say goodbye, knowing I would never see him again. And he died 2 weeks after his birthday, on the Thursday. But he, again, willed himself to stay alive for the other thing that he loved, which was the NCAA basketball tournament. And he had particular interest that year because Georgia Tech was in it. So he rooted for all the Georgia teams because he lived in Atlanta. Although he grew up in Michigan, so he was an import to Atlanta. But, the NCAA tournament, Georgia Tech made the Final Four, although they didn't win the tournament. And that ended on the weekend. And then he died on the Thursday right after that. And he was 50. He was 50. That was in 1990. So I have no doubt that if he hadn't gotten sick, if he'd stayed healthy, and we had stayed playing together, that we would be regarded today like, say, Martell and Stansby. Lou was an incredible player.
Wow.
And we were. Even though we only played for 6 years, we had a lot of notches on our belt. All right, here's where Bob Hammond enters the story. So I said goodbye to Lou that morning, and during the previous evening and that morning, I'd had some overtures about playing on a team in the 2-day Swiss, and initially Bob was supposed to play with Howie Weinstein, but somehow he ended up playing with me. Okay, good. And at the last minute, we picked up a fifth for our team. Our team was with a good pair, but not a great pair. Jerry Michaud and Larry Richardson. They were a regular partnership. Jerry Michaud had a lot of money because he was a class action suit lawyer, and a very successful one. And Larry Richardson was a programmer who was working for Bob at the time. And
is Jerry sponsoring this outfit?
Right. I mean, I didn't have anything to do with that. I was happy to play with Bob on this team, and whatever other arrangements there were, I had no knowledge. I was happy to play on this team. And at the last minute, we had a chance to add a player to our team, and it was one of the Spingold, or one of the Vanderbilt winners. I think it was Tommy Sanders' partner, but I know it was John Sutherland. I think he had been playing with Tommy, but he was definitely on the Vanderbilt winners. And Hammond found out that Sutherland was available and levitated at the prospect, said, "Oh, get him." Okay, so that was our team. We were five-handed. And so Bob and I did the usual Bart method of filling out the card. Bob is pretty good at that also. So we just filled out a card in about a half an hour and played, and we won the event. So that was my second experience winning an event with the first-time partner. And while initially Michaud and Richardson were supposed to play a lot, they ended up playing just 2 matches together. On the first day, Sutherland played 3 matches with each of them, and on the second day, he played 4 matches with each of them. And Bob and I played them all. And on the second day, we weren't leading, but on the second day, we won all our matches. None of them were blowouts, but we did win them all, and that was good enough to win the event. Okay. So I had two great results at that tournament, even though it was a very sad occasion while it was happening.
Mm.
And then I went home, and 2 weeks later, Lou Boom died. But so I didn't play again with Bob until I moved here to Dallas. So that's a story in itself. So at some point during the 90s, I became aware that Bob had his own company, SCA Promotions, here in Dallas. And, I'd been living in Chicago where I was an options trader. Let me digress for another few seconds here. In my working career since I graduated college, I've had 3 different careers, but they've all been to support my bridge habit. The first one was, and they've all been what I consider the profession of choice for serious bridge players in that time period. So I'm too young, even though I'm old, I'm still too young to have had the first profession of choice for bridge players, which was lawyer. So I came along in time for the second profession of choice, which was programmer. And when I graduated college, I had no ambition, but I knew I had to get a job because I was tired of school. When I entered college, I thought I was going to get all the degrees, but by the time I got out, I was happy to have any degrees. But I knew it was time to get a job. So my first try was as an actuary. I applied at John Hancock in Boston. I actually passed the first 2 actuarial exams, which were just math. But in a decision that was brilliant for both of us, John Hancock rejected me. I had all the credentials you could possibly want. I was a recent MIT graduate, a math major who had passed the first 2 actuarial exams, but they figured out that I was not corporate material, and were they ever right? So I wandered around for a month, and then a friend of mine who graduated the year before told me to apply at the labs at MIT where they were working on the Apollo project. That's where she was working. So I did that, and they hired me immediately.
Apollo, like the space?
Like landing on the moon.
Wow.
So that was my first job out of college, and I started 2 weeks after Neil Armstrong walked on the moon.
Oh, my God.
Stories about that as well. So that was my first career. I was a programmer, and it took me a while to get good at it, and it took me even longer to realize I was good at it, but that's what I did. And my second career, I had people begging me to come trade options when that became the hot career for bridge players. I resisted for a while, but eventually I took the bait and moved to Chicago to do that. And I did it well enough to keep doing it, but not well enough to stop. So there were a lot of people who blew out, and then there were some other people that made a fortune. I did neither of those. But I did that from 86 until 02. And then I was in the wilderness for a year. And
literally?
Well, I was wondering what to do. I wasn't old enough or rich enough to retire.
But you weren't literally in the wilderness. You weren't like in the wilderness.
In the job wilderness.
Yes, okay. Got it.
I considered going back to programming, but nobody seemed to want a programmer who had been out of programming for 16 years. And then I got a suggestion from Sharon Osberg to apply to IGT, the slot machine makers, because she knew the guy who was the top guy at the company. And although he was semi-retired by then, but he was a bridge player. So she gave me his number and said, call him up, he'll find something for you. So I could. This was in mid-December of 02. And I called him up. He was very nice. He said, I described my background. He said, that sounds pretty good. Send me your resume. We'll see what we can do. Mid-December. So I did what he asked, and I waited. And I waited, and I knew it was the hot season. So I cut him some slack. But in mid-January, I said, I haven't heard from him. Let's see what's happening. So I called him again. He was very polite, but he acted like he didn't quite remember the first call. I said, well, this isn't right. But he said all the right things again, and it sounded like something might happen. But I knew that he played bridge in rubber bridge games with Bob Hammond.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, I'm going to call up Bob and see if he can prod this guy a little bit. So I called up Bob, and at the end of that conversation, I was coming to work for Bob. As Bob realized correctly that everything I'd ever done was a perfect match for what he was doing. So that was the end of going to Reno to work for IGT, and a week later I came down to Dallas and started working for Bob, and I am still doing that. So some years earlier, in the mid-'90s, I was talking to Bob, and we got talking about his company. I had no inkling whatsoever that I'd ever be working for him at that point. I was an options trader still. But he described what he did, and then he gave me some advice. He said, if you ever see anybody doing something weird for $1 million, root against them, just as a matter of principle, because what his company does is underwrite people doing weird stuff for a lot of money. So he said there's a reasonable chance that he'll have the other side of it. Might not, but just in case, root again. So the kinds of stuff that Bob's company underwrites it's all promotional. So a lot of it's sports related, and like holes in one, half court shots, but a lot of it is not sports related. So when Bob hired me, he didn't quite know where I'd fit in, but after a while he figured out that I was a numbers guy and that I should be one of the people, along with him and his son Chris, who calculate the odds, what the real odds are of these unlikely events, because it matters to us whether it's 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000. And I'm one of the guys that does that. So more so than Bob and Chris, I'm the pure math guy in that department, but we all are interchangeable in a way. Chris is more the pure sports guy, and Bob is he does a little bit of everything, but he's brilliant at figuring out a way to quantify something that seems unquantifiable. So in that respect, I compare him to Bill James. You know who Bill James is?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, the baseball number cruncher, guy who invented sabermetrics. So he's one of my heroes also.
Wow.
And the thing that I admire most about him is the way he can quantify baseball things that seem unquantifiable. Well, Bob has that same skill in his business. He can tackle a problem and figure out a way to calculate the odds.
Right.
So my job working for him is fun, and in the process over the years, we have played bridge semi-regularly over that time period. At times we've been regular partners, but something always seems to get in the way to disturb that, and then we don't play again until the next time comes up. But he's great to play with, and I still try to keep it simple. I discovered when we became regular partners the first time that he is a mad scientist. I'd always thought of him as a pure seat-of-the-pants player who had a lot of good ideas, but could play with anybody and make it work. Well, it turns out that when you let him loose, he wants to create the perfect mousetrap in all situations. He's never seen any convention that he could not improve. So I let him go for a little while, but then I realized, well, whoa, I got to put a stop to this. So I would beg off. I would say, well, that's too complicated. I can't do that. And, even though I have a really, really good memory,
Yeah.
I decided, we got to stop the train somewhere. We don't need a moving target, and that's always been good enough. He can play whatever system he's stuck with.
Yeah.
But it was my job as his partner to stick the system. And
well, it makes me wonder if I should ask you for details of that, or just can you give me an example of where he became a mad scientist? Maybe.
Well, I don't know when it started. I have a feeling he's been that way all along. I just didn't know it.
No, like in a recent iteration, perhaps between the two of you, where you agreed to play, I don't know, say two-way blue minor force swing, and then the wheels.
Yeah, right. And he would start to put bells and whistles on it, and his ideas are great. I'll give him that. But he's making them up on the fly at all times.
Oh, you mean you mean at the table? You're saying?
Well, no, I mean, in the build-up, it's not like he says, I have this great idea. This is what I have played for a long time. You'll like it. It's, I can do a better job of this. Give me a few hours while I work on it. Instead of taking whatever pretty good convention already exists for that thing.
I remember
like a Flannery structure. Okay? Now, I love Flannery, so I have that in common with Bob. So we meshed immediately on that. And a long time ago, Ian came up with a method over Flannery that I thought was a little better than what most people were playing.
Yeah.
But it involves using 2-no trump as the game force.
What's typically the game force? What's typically the game force in Flannery?
Well, I don't know. People play different things. Some people play 2 diamonds, 3 of a major's game forcing. Some people play 2 diamonds, 3 diamonds as an artificial game force. I think that's what Bob likes. But when I first played Flannery, most people were playing the 2-no ask for the shape, and then you could invite over that. And I thought that was overkill for invitational auctions. That you didn't really need a lot of invitational auctions. I think this is true theoretically right now in all systems. You should be minimizing the number of invitational auctions. It's the game forcing auctions that need the heavy machinery for choice of games or for slams. The invitational auctions, you don't need that. Just make an invite. The most important thing is whether a partner's accepting. Let him look at his hand and decide whether to accept. So I decided over Flannery, you only need 1 invite, 2 diamonds, 3 of a major. It doesn't, you might miss a perfect fit game from time to time, but the main thing that you have to evaluate is how well does opener like his hand. If he's in the top half or the top, 60%, just bid a game. If you like it, bid it. Okay, you don't have to know partner's shape, and you don't have to tip off the opener's shape, and you also get the responder to declare the hand, which is really important because the concealment factor is important in Flannery, and save 2-no trump for the game forces when you're about to make a slam try. Find out the opener's shape right away, and then set trump. So that's what I like to play. So I think I actually imposed that on Bob when we first played, because I know we both liked Flannery then. But when it came time for him to dictate the system, he had a better method. And I agreed to play it because it was pretty good and it wasn't that complicated. But in other areas, it is complicated. And
you mean the Flannery system?
No. I'm talking about other areas of bidding.
Right.
Like his. I think he likes to play the 2/1s are not quite game forcing, and that introduces a lot of complications. So I think I might have told him, "Can we just make it game forcing?"
Yeah.
And he agreed to that. Because I like to play 1 spade, 2 clubs, 2 spades, 3 clubs is forcing.
Yeah. Me too.
The old-fashioned method that I grew up with, Gorin, where the 2/1 is almost game forcing. Well, don't make it almost. If it's almost, make it always. Always is a lot easier than almost. All right, so Bob and I have had some more successes in our recent play, primarily in the senior knockout that we played for a number of years on teams with Vanita Gupta and Billy Miller. And we had this other pair, Meckwell, that helped us out. So we won that event a few times. And
this is in the fall.
And I love Bob. Bob is a true genius, and not just at bridge. You know, he's a Renaissance man. He has a lot of interests, and you know, he's sneaky knowledgeable on many subjects.
Well, my first question, when I talked to Phil sent me an email, and I thought, okay, I want to interview Bart. He gave me all this great fodder, and the first question that I wanted to ask you, and I didn't have the heart to ask you when I mentioned it earlier, but he talks about class of player. Bob Hammond, to my mind, is like the dean of American bridge. He's won 15 world championships. He's won. I mean, I'm sure he must have been a first ballot Hall of Famer. And you work with him. You see him probably most days. And I wanted you to what makes Bob like Bob, and Can you compare the two of you? How come he's had the career that he's had, and you?
Bob is incomparable. So let's start right there.
That's a good word.
Some people complain that he ignores them, when walking down the hall. But I know from experience that he's lost in thought. He's just sort of wandering while thinking. And I mean, it's not always, he'll often say hello, but sometimes he'll just walk by, and I'll know he's lost in thought.
But my question? Let me just state this emphatically here. Is what makes Bob great as a bridge player?
Well, his analytical skills are second to none, and his compartmentalization is also second to none. He is the best ever at putting his results behind him. It's when that board is played, it's over. We can't do anything about that one. Let's worry about this one. And he's the all-time best at that. And I try to emulate that myself, but I know I fail. I can't help myself. Most people can't help themselves. You worry about that one that got away.
Yeah.
And then another one gets away. Well,
I see it in chess so much. I play a lot of online chess, and it's like when you take a piece, then the opponent takes a piece. They just sort of do it out of you took my piece, I'm going to take your piece, even if it's not a great move. But sort of there's this instant wanting to get it back.
So Victor Mitchell was one of my first mentors, and he described this phenomenon of getting buried, of having a bad result and then having a lot more bad results. And he described it like a machine gun, where he would punch his hand, and just bing, 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 and he said, don't ever let that happen. And that's death. Now in that match that I ended up losing to Kaplan and Kay that I was telling you about earlier, where we upset all the current holders, that's what happened in the second half. We were ahead at the half, but in the second half we got caught in the rat-tat-tat-tat-tat and couldn't make it stop. But I try to avoid that. So it's happened to me a few other times. I'm aware of it, and sometimes you can't get it to stop. It's weird. I've certainly had many brutal losses in my career. Coming from ahead to lose in the finals, in the semifinals. Brutal losses. These are the ones that burn. And
yeah, like you get a bad result, but then you go high on a hand, and then the next hand, and you get a bad result, and then you get the next hand, and you decide to go low because you went high on the last hand. Like, is that something that?
Yes, right. You get out of sync and can't get it back. One of those for me was the Spingold in 1981. So I lived in Boston. I went up to college there in 1965 and hung around. I liked Boston. Still love Boston.
But you're a Yankees fan.
Oh yeah. But I don't hate the Red Sox. Yes, I grew up a Yankees fan. My father was a Yankees fan. I was coming of baseball age in the mid-'50s, and where the Yankees were winning every year, and they had Mickey Mantle and Yogi Berra and Whitey Ford. I mean, what's not to like? So I started rooting for them, and I've never stopped. But when I went up to school in '65, the Yankees were in what I call the dark ages. So in '65 and '66, both the Yankees and Red Sox were in the dark ages. But suddenly in '67, the Red Sox had a very good team, and they won the pennant. So I started my tradition of rooting for the hometown team wherever I was living, unless they were playing the Yankees. I do have my priorities.
Sure.
And I still do that. I've lived a lot of places, but everywhere I go, I root for the hometown team, unless they're playing the Yankees. And I've lived in Boston, and I grew up in Connecticut, but I grew up just far south enough in Connecticut to be a New York fan. Well, my father was from Poughkeepsie, it's where I was born, but I grew up in Connecticut, and so I've been a Yankee fan all my life. But I've lived in Boston and Seattle and Chicago and now Dallas, and I've rooted for the locals everywhere I've gone. And unless they're playing the Yankees. And in football, I root for the New York Giants. So that didn't start until I'd been a Yankee fan for a few years. I didn't know about football. The first year I rooted for the football Giants was 1958. The year of the greatest game ever played, the overtime game against the Colts, which they lost. But I'm still a Giant fan. They're playing right now, by the way, against the Cowboys. So I think the Cowboys are up 13-12 at the half. So I don't know what's happening right now. So yeah, I'm a huge sports fan. Baseball is my first love. The other games are sports. Baseball is a religion. It's a religious experience. Just even without the Yankees, baseball is beautiful in ways that no other sport is. So I've loved baseball all my life, but I think you've got to get onto it young. It's hard to get into baseball later, although some people have, like Barry Regal, for instance. But I'm a huge sports junkie, but baseball is in a separate classification among all sports. But I follow just about anything that can be played.
Well, can you give us an example, like from going back to what we were talking about, Bob, with the calculations? Like one that let's I mean, I don't know if you could even talk about this, but the Lance Armstrong deal. Were you there when you calculated?
Well, I got there just too late to have any influence on that. That was happening when I arrived, and all I could do was watch the train wreck, and I couldn't contribute too much to it at that point.
So you mean they were making the number when you showed up?
Well, the contract was already in place.
Okay.
Which was an escalating contract that got worse as he won more, and that contract was already a couple of years old when I got there. But I think the snowball effect was kicking in right as I got there, the worst one, and so I got there in time to see the dispute over we finally resisted by calling him a cheater, but the official powers that be were not calling him on that, so our opinion didn't matter, and so it went to arbitration and we lost. So at that point, the first time around, he was an American hero, and we did not have enough leg to stand on, and we lost. But then several years later, he was an American pariah, and we had everything on our side, and then we won that go-round the second time around. And so there's not a lot I'm allowed to say on that, but I got there just not in time to have anything that I could really do about it.
Mm.
So I worked on a lot of fun cases with Bob. I worked on one that one of the first cases I worked on shortly after I got there was whether the Martian rovers would find evidence of let's see.
Oh my God.
Evidence of life on Mars. Yeah, evidence of life on Mars, but there was a time limit. And so one of my first tasks for Bob was he told me to see what you can do about this. See if you can get in touch with the scientists that are working on this project and ask them how. It was rivers on Mars, or oceans. That's right, that was it. It was to discover whether there were now or at any time in the past oceans on Mars. That was the promotion.
For who was the client? Who wanted this, and why?
A fast food seafood restaurant. Right. So that was the gimmick. Oceans on Mars. But they had a time limit. So the two lunar or Martian rovers landed in January of 2004, when I had been there less than a year. So I don't know what to do. So I figured these guys are busy. They're on Martian time. This is what I've read about them, which is like a 26-hour day. So they got quickly out of sync with Earth time.
Are you serious? They're on Martian time. There's such a thing?
Well, yeah, it's like a 26-hour day. So they got staggered with Earth time.
Huh.
And they're up at all sorts of weird hours. And besides, they're busy. They might not want to hear from me about a seafood fast food project.
Are you there?
Yeah, I just heard a noise, but okay. All right, so
I never knew Mars had 26 hours in the day.
Yeah, so it's something like that, but they got staggered compared to Earth time. So they were working all sorts of weird hours, and so they could be in communication when the two planets were facing each other. So it was only half the day. And
what do you mean communication? You're talking about like between a machine.
Well, between us and Mars. between the rovers, which were on different places on Mars, but let's see, they landed in two different places. But anyway, they were busy, and they were all professors at Cornell. Okay, this was largely a Cornell project.
Yeah.
So Bob said to me basically, well, why don't you call them up? I said, well, that doesn't sound right to me. They're busy. They have more important things to worry about than fast seafood today.
So I can't wait to hear. I can't wait to hear how you approach them.
I'm despairing about what to do. But the salesman on the project, that was it. I stopped into his office one day, and he's looking through a list of the physics department at Cornell, which is where they're all from.
The salesman on the project.
Yeah,
what do you
our
mean?
salesman.
Oh, your salesman. Okay.
Our salesman, Paul. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So he's just idly looking at the faculty at Cornell.
Yeah.
In the physics department. And so I'm kibitzing and looking over his shoulder, and suddenly I see a name, Saul Tukolsky, and I know him, bridge player. He and his wife Rosalind Tukolsky. I know her better than Saul, but I know them. So I figure, all right, there's an opening. Yeah. I'll call Saul Tukolsky and see if he's got any good ideas for me here. So I call him up at Cornell and talk to him, and he says, well, he's not working on that project. He's a physics professor at Cornell. So, by the way, my father went to Cornell, and I got in there, but I've never been there. I applied there, got in, but I've never physically been there. But I've heard it's beautiful.
Yeah.
So I called Saul Tukolsky, and he says he's not working on that project, but he knows some of the people who are, and he puts me in touch with the head of the physics department at Cornell. He says that this guy's not directly on the project either, but he knows all the people who are. And this guy's name, I remember his last name was, Joe Vaverka, Veverka, Joe Vaverka. So he gives me this guy's number, the head of the physics department at Cornell.
Okay.
All right. Well, I've got an angle here. So I'm very nervous calling him because he's not a bridge player. But I call him. He answers. I explain why I'm calling. And he's as happy as could be. He's happy that someone cares about what they're doing. For whatever reason. They get some publicity. So, and he says he's not working on the project directly, but he knows all the guys who are. And he thinks that they might not want to be disturbed, but he offers some insight into their philosophy of doing things. So, the premise of our promotion is whether the lunar or whether the Martian rovers can find evidence of oceans on Mars. Can they find evidence of oceans on Mars within a given time period? But the time period is only a month, like a month from right now.
So is the contract, where are we with the seafood people? Have they already taken out the contract? Have they paid you the money? We're working on that.
Okay. We're working on that. Okay, but we want to get it done. At this point, the first rover has landed, and the second one is due to land in a couple of weeks. There's two of them due to land in a 2-week period, and then there's one of them at least was still working fairly recently. I think both of them might finally have died, but that was long time ago.
Wow.
Yeah, their working lifetime was expected to be about 6 months or a year, but then they went for 15 years. It was amazing.
Who came up, like, why did the seafood, what was the genesis of the seafood company wanting to, like, did
Oceans on Mars, evidence of oceans on Mars.
I know, but, like, why, where did they come up with this? Like, this
I don't know. They have an advertising department. It was their advertising department.
So they called you up there, like, can you sell us insurance on whether or not there's oceans on Mars?
Right, and they have a budget, and it's basically an advertising budget, and we knew that the likelihood was small, but we wanted a scientist to tell us that. We didn't want to shoot from the hip ourselves.
How much money are we talking about here?
Well, they wanted to, like $1 million worth of coverage, something like that, enough to buy a free jumbo shrimp for everybody in America.
Okay.
Whatever that might cost.
Can you say the name of the company, or do you not?
Long John Silver.
Long John Silver.
So they wanted to give away a free jumbo shrimp to everybody in America.
I don't think I've ever actually been to Long John Silver's.
So they had a budget for that, and okay, so I got a hold of Joe Vaverka, and he wasn't willing to be our guy. And he told me that the people that were actually working on the project were kind of busy right now, because they were working on Martian time, so their sleep habits were all out of whack.
But Joe Vaverka is the guy who was excited that you called, right?
Yes, he was the head of the physics department at Cornell.
Yeah, okay.
He knew all the scientists that were working on this, even though he wasn't one of them right now.
Yeah.
I think he said he had worked on space projects at other times, but he wasn't on this one. But he was as nice as could be. And what he told me was sufficient to make our day. It wasn't that he would be the guy, and it wasn't that he knew how to get in touch with those guys. It was that they were conservative by nature, and they weren't going to make a claim that there were oceans on Mars unless they were really sure. And the rovers weren't going to get very far in the time period that we had, in a month. Even if
you knew that without Vaverka. You knew that without Vaverka. You didn't need Vaverka for that.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. But he confirmed it. That they were being very conservative. They were investigating a small territory very closely. So he didn't think that they were going to go more than, say, a mile from where they were. So while they might find evidence of water, it would be very unlikely for the scientists on the project, who he described as quite conservative by nature.
Right.
They weren't going to say, this proves that there are oceans. The worst that they were going to say was, this proves there was water here.
I see you like running into Bob's office with like a piece of paper or something, like being like, "We've got it" or something when you after this phone call.
So he was willing to characterize the scientists on the project as extremely conservative by nature.
And he was doing this for your benefit. Like, he was wanting you to be able to like, right.
Yes. So finally we needed to reach an agreement with the client about who a neutral arbiter would be about whether it had happened. Had they discovered evidence of oceans on Mars? And we agreed that we would leave it up to the actual scientists. That they had to announce I think it was a month. They had to announce within a month that they had evidence of oceans on Mars, according to Joe Vaverka. That he knew that they were conservative, so that was extremely unlikely that they would find anything. Even if they tripped across a puddle, they weren't going to announce that it was an ocean.
And the company didn't really. Did you expose this to the company? You didn't. You didn't.
Well, no.
You didn't show your
they
hand.
had an advertising budget, so this was part of their advertising budget. And they were willing to spend their advertising budget to underwrite the possibility that they would have to pay off.
Yeah.
As long as that was sufficient for us. And we agreed with them finally that the official scientists working on the project, one of them had to announce that there were oceans on Mars. Otherwise, it hadn't happened.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the agreement we reached, and this was through my knowing who Saul Tukolsky was, that I called him, and he put me in touch with the head of the physics department, who was quite happy to talk to me at length about his guys and what they were doing. And this was great. This was one of the greatest parts of my job. And that was after I'd been there less than a year. So in our business, the best thing that can happen to us is what I call close but no cigar. So
because then the client wants to come back and do more business.
It's like other kinds of our projects are like for the World Series for many years. There was I think Taco Bell wanted a big payoff if somebody hit a home run that hit their target. So the first year that we did this, the target was in San Francisco Bay because it was the World. San Francisco was in the World Series.
Yeah.
Right. The Giants were in it, right? In 02. Yeah, I know all these things. So they would put a target out there, hit the target and we'll pay off. So we can calculate those things a little more closely. So we would underwrite that. More recently, they've gone through other things. All right, so back to the oceans on Mars. And so we agreed with the client that an official scientist on the project had to announce oceans on Mars or it hadn't happened. We couldn't have some,
But the client doesn't know that. The client doesn't know that you've had this conversation with Joe Laverca.
I don't know. He doesn't care.
So they don't care. Okay.
Right. He doesn't care. All we needed was an agreement that an official scientist on the project had to announce oceans on Mars by the time limit. So, close but no cigar. This is what's best for us. So, like in this home run thing, in some years it was in a regular stadium where they had a big target out there in the deep outfield somewhere. It said hit here and free tacos for everybody. And so what would be good for us is if somebody hit a home run that got close but didn't hit the sign.
Yeah.
Close but no cigar. Okay. Or if they hit a home run into McCovey Cove that got close to the target but didn't hit it. Okay. So what happened on this Oceans on Mars was kind of a close but no cigar. 2 days after our time limit expired, I always remember this was a leap year because February 29th was the last day. Okay.
Of the expiration.
Of the promotion.
Right. That's a good last day for that. I think that's a great last day for that.
Because one of the rovers landed early January and the other one landed mid-January, and the promotion was going to be over on Feb 29. Okay. So on March 2nd or 3rd, they announced that they had discovered evidence of water on Mars. Not now, but in the past. Okay, so that's not quite oceans, and it wasn't quite in time, but it was a big announcement. And so that's what I call close but no cigar. Where you get some legs out of the promotion,
right,
but you don't have to pay off.
Right. But what I'm curious about is like what you guys are doing with the pricing of the insurance when you find out this information.
Well, we can't call it insurance because we have had a favorable ruling from the Texas Insurance Board where we agreed two things. One is they won't bother us, and two is we won't call it insurance. Okay?
Okay.
That's the deal. So it's called contingency prize coverage. But it functions kind of like insurance. And we have reinsurers. We take our risks to real insurance companies, but we ourselves are not a real insurance company. So a lot of the stuff we do is math, pure math. That's the kind of things we like. There's certain games that we've invented ourselves that we know what the odds are with certainty. So we like those games. We like selling those games. And there's other things that are applied math, like things in sporting events. Chances of holes in one, chances of somebody breaking Joe DiMaggio's streak, where it's not pure math, but you can calculate it well enough that it's almost like pure math. And then there's other things that are kind of shoot from the hip, where we gotta wing it in a way, but we don't like those. We like to reduce things to math. So this really wasn't math. This Mars thing. It was really like the read on the. Yeah, we reduced it to something where we thought the odds were considerably lower than the amount they were willing to pay us for it.
I see. Gotcha.
Okay. So, if the amount that they were willing to pay us was, say, 2 or 3% of the amount we'd have to pay out, we had determined that the actual risk of the event occurring was much lower than that. Because we've had our information from Joe Vaverka. He knew his guys.
I hope Joe gets to listen to this call, to listen to this episode. If we have a listener out there that does Joe Vaverka, will you please send this episode to Joe? We know he's not he's not a bridge player. Maybe is Saul still alive?
Saul is, as far as I know, he is still a professor at Cornell. Yes. My father went to Cornell. That's why I applied there. That's when I got into MIT. That's where I had to go. That was a good fit. So,
well, I saw that you and Harold Lilly, you had nice words about Harold Lilly's passing on Bridge Winners.
And I have recent information about that on Sunday, 2 days ago, yesterday. Yesterday. There was an event, a memorial for Harold in Austin, one of the two cities he called home, Las Vegas and Austin, because his second wife was from Austin. So he split his time between Vegas and Austin. And it was very, very nice. So I drove down there, and other bridge players that were there included Mark Feldman, who lives in Austin and was a college friend of mine, and Mike Gerwitz, who lives in San Antonio, another bridge player who was a college roommate of mine. Jim Hilton was there. He was originally from New Jersey, I think, but he moved to Austin about 10 years ago. So he and his wife, Lee, were there. And David Sokolow was there, and several other local players. But there were a lot of other just, friends from Austin. And a lot of family members spoke. Harold's first wife was a bridge player, Joyce, who I knew quite well, but she died in 2001 or early 2002, and he married Janice about 10 years ago, and it was a wonderful occasion, truly wonderful. The blended families. Harold's first family and his second family. he didn't have any kids of his own, but he married into 4 kids with each wife.
Wow.
And they are all very friendly with each other.
Oh.
And they were all there, except, well, one of Joyce's kids died in 9/11. He worked for Cantor Fitzgerald, which was up on the top floors of one of the Trade Center buildings.
Right.
But his 3 siblings were there, and Harold's current wife had 4 kids, and they were there, and these people are all very friendly with each other through the common bond of Harold. So Harold's a guy I met in college, and he didn't go to MIT, but we met him when I was a sophomore because he and Mike Gerwitz, who was in my class, met each other at the partnership desk for the Eastern States Regional, the big one around Memorial Day, which was really big, and 50 years ago. They met in 1967, before anybody was a life master, and did very well in the event, and bonded, and became. So I met Harold immediately after that, and he became part of our gang, part of the MIT gang, even though he never lived in Boston, he never went to MIT, but he spent a lot of time there. So Mike Gerwitz, who was one of my college roommates, he was in charge of telling the college stories from that era, and Harold's family from both wives, a lot of them spoke, and it was a truly wonderful occasion. So he was a great guy.
I got to play with him. I just met him for the first and only time in Las Vegas. I was moping around in Bramley, as you described yourself, when the day of the Swiss was starting, trying to find some sort of way to play in the Swiss. And through my friend Anam Teba, she put me in touch with, oh my gosh, I can't remember his name.
I played with Anam once under those circumstances. I was in the Grand National teams on a very fine Texas team. We expected to do well, except we lost the first day. So suddenly we were all eligible for the LM pairs, and I didn't have a partner. And I hooked up with Anam at the last minute, and we were both very happy about that. It worked out well.
Yeah, she's anyway. She put me in touch with Steve Zolotow, and they were looking for a 5th. So I got to play half of the boards with Harold, and that was. When Janet, he was playing half with Janice, half with me, and then Steve was playing with Andy Goodman, and I was playing the other half with Andy. So the thing is, it's like the moping around thing. You have. I realized that if I just wanted to mope around, that I wasn't going to get anywhere. So I did put myself out there, and it was a blessing because I got to we had a couple dinners together with Harold and Janice and Andy, and it was a lot of fun.
So Kip and I, speaking of Steve and Andy, are playing with Steve and Andy this month in San Francisco.
In what events?
The Soloway and the Reisinger.
Well, there you go. I actually reached out to Steve.
That's all we have time for.
Yes, I hear you. I reached out to Steve. I said, "Are you looking?" Because I was looking for a game, and he said that he was booked, but he didn't tell me that it was you and Kit.
Yep. So I'm looking forward to that. Because those are good guys. So I know Steve has played a lot with Anam. I certainly enjoyed my one event with her. I pride myself on being able to play with anybody on a short notice. Well, I did that with Lou Bloom, and we won. I did that with Bob. We won. But I topped both of them when I did it with Bjorn Felinius. We hooked up for the LM pairs in Chicago in 2006 and won the event. And I was trying to snag him as a regular partner at that time, but he had just been scooped up by Peter Frieden, so he couldn't do it. But a few years later, he found himself loose again for the Blue Ribbons. And yeah, I want to finish up about my winning with first-time partners. So I won with Bjorn in 06 in Chicago in the Ellen pairs. So then he was committed to be playing with Peter Frieden after that. But a few years later, he found himself loose for the Blue Ribbon pairs in San Diego in 09 and got in touch with me, and we played that event. That was the second time we ever played, and we won that also. So we decided we had a good thing going, and we decided to go for the cycle, and we played in the Platinum pairs, which was a new event, and didn't win. So we haven't played since then.
Tough. He's a tough customer, sounds like.
Yeah, we were going for the cycle. Yeah, I'd love to talk about Sydney. I could talk about Sydney for a long time. But as you can tell, I could talk about just about anything for a long time.
Well, you have quite a memory. It's impressive, for sure. And Sydney is somebody that I never got the chance to meet.
Yesterday, the 3rd, was the 4th anniversary of his death. He was just shy of 85 years old. He exceeded expectation by many years. His father died in his 40s, and his son, his only child, Sydney was an only child, and Sydney's only child died at the age of 41. So both his father and his son died in their 40s. Sydney got to almost 85. And it wasn't like he was a picture of health. He was the biggest hypochondriac I've ever known, and proud of it.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. I mean, he knew it. He knew it, but he didn't care.
What's a hypochondriac?
What's a hypochondriac?
Yeah.
That's somebody that thinks they're sick all the time.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah. So Sydney had all these ailments. Some of them were real, but many of them were imagined. There's a story about Sydney winning a national event on a 7-man team. The only time that's ever happened. So this is a typical Sydney story. So he was playing in the men's border match at a national in the mid-'70s, and
a men's border match.
Yes, this is when there were still men's and women's border match.
Amazing.
That's another story. So in the mid-'70s, he was playing on a 4-man team, and he took ill after the first session. It was two qualifying, 2 final, so they'd had a decent game. So they found a substitute, and they qualified. So then Sydney showed up to play the next day and collapsed during the first board. So they found another substitute to finish that session. And Sydney still hadn't recovered by the second session, so they found another substitute to play the fourth session, and they won the event.
Oh, my God. That's really good.
Yep, the 7-man team. The 7-man team. Well, so when Sydney and I got together, it was magic. So this was through John Sutherland, another one of my great friends. So he was featured early in one of those other stories. So back in 1995, John Sutherland and Dan Morris, a regular partnership, were playing on a team with Edgar Kaplan and Norman Kay. But by that time, Edgar had been diagnosed with the cancer that would eventually kill him. Edgar was a huge believer in four-man teams. He never wanted to play more than four. However, by that time, he was getting weak enough that he couldn't do it. And another problem was that he and Norman Kay were not so young anymore. They were in their 70s. And the stamina aspect was getting to Norman at least as much as it was to Edgar. So a year or two before that, they had drafted Sidney to be a fifth on the team to play some of the time with Edgar and Norman. Okay, so that worked out pretty well. They had one brutal loss by 1 imp in the finals of the Vanderbilt in 94 or 95. I think it was 95, earlier that year. So by the fall, they were playing with Morris and Sutherland. And John Sutherland had the bright idea, instead of playing a three-man pair, why don't they just get a partner for Sidney and play three pairs?
Was Sidney I thought Sidney was a sponsor. Was he not a sponsor?
No, not at all.
Oh, okay.
Sidney is one of the greatest players of all time.
Whoops.
I mean, Sidney
I
could have
thought maybe
afforded
because of the
Sidney could have afforded it. Sidney was a man of means.
Yeah.
But he was not a sponsor. No, not at all. Sidney told me that during the late 50s, he thought he was the best player in the world. Okay.
Got it.
So I was ecstatic to be, So John Sutherland had the idea of finding a partner for Sidney, and his idea was me. So he called me up because we were friends and suggested it to me, and I was ecstatic at the idea because I knew Sidney was the guy that had played that six-diamond hand from the mid-50s, where it's a very famous hand. You've probably read about it.
I don't know it. No, I don't know it.
Okay, well, you'll have to look it up.
Okay, I will.
But he basically, after passing for the first couple of rounds, he jumped to six diamonds on a four-card suit.
Wow.
And caught six-card support in the dummy, and then made it on a non-simultaneous double squeeze.
Huh.
Yes, this is one of the greatest one-man tour de force. Tour de force. It's one of the most spectacular solo hands of all time. Well, it's my pick for the most spectacular. So I learned about this hand 50 years ago, and I was ecstatic to be playing with the man who had done that.
Wow.
And so I jumped at it, and we started playing. Our first tournament was going to be Atlanta, fall of '95, but we weren't going to be playing until the Blue Ribbon Pairs. So I led off that tournament by playing with John Sutherland in the two-day pair event that starts the tournament, and we won it. Okay, so then a couple days later, it's my turn to play with Sidney in the Blue Ribbon Pairs, which was supposed to be a warm-up for the Risinger, where we were going to play our six-man team. So I find Sidney the evening before the Blue Ribbon Pairs, after the evening session, to go over system. So we write our names on the card, and we write strong no trump, And then I asked Sydney, oh, by the way, what are you doing? You're not playing bridge. And he says, I'm an all, just with that New Orleans Southern accent. All, like I can't imitate it. So, I said, well, what do you do with it? He said, I look for it. and we were off and running. So, I mean, this was about 11 at night after the evening session of the day before the Blue Ribbons. So we start talking, and I got a lot of stories, and Sydney's got a lot of stories. He puts me to shame in that department. So we trade stories for an hour, and then we say, yeah, you know what? Let's fill out our card tomorrow. So we meet a half an hour before game time, fill out the card, and we ended up third in the event. Okay, not so bad. I wish I could say we did that well in the Risinger, but that didn't go so well. But Sydney and I played on Edgar Kaplan's teams for the rest of his life, and he died in the fall of '97. That was the fall of '95, and I was one of Edgar's teammates when he won his last event in the spring of '97. For some reason, which I can't recall right now, Sydney had a commitment to do something else. This was on the 2-day Swiss at the end of the Spring Nationals. Again, it's one of my best events. So I was playing with my friend Walt Schaefer in that event, and we had Kaplan and Kay, and we had Gear Helgamo and Brian Grubach. Okay. So I'm digressing from the Sydney stories here, but this is one worth telling. So we qualified easily enough, and the second day, Helgamo and Grubach weren't running too well. So, and Helgamo had to go home after the first session of the finals. So he and Grubach played a couple of matches, and Walter and I think, sat out a match. And when it came time for the fourth match, Helgamo put in a special request to play a match with Edgar because he knew Edgar was sick.
Yeah.
And so request granted. And during that match, Helgamo had his most famous hand that he's ever played, his 6-diamond hand, where he made 6 diamonds on a super intra finesse in a suit in which he had, let me get it straight here.
Against Ralph Katz?
Yes. Where he had ace king 6/4 opposite 9/7 third, and he led low to the 7 and picked up lefties 8-1 by taking repeated finesses against righty, who was Ralph. And the lefty wasn't too shabby either. That was Richard Pavlicek. And at my table, Kit Woolsey missed that play. And so that hand occurred in these 7 boards that he played with Edgar. The most famous Helgamo hand.
Wow.
And this hand was legendary.
I never knew that Edgar was his partner with that.
Right. So by the time the dinner break was over, this hand was already legendary.
Wow.
And during the break, I christened this hand a gift for Edgar, because it truly was.
Yeah.
And then
wow.
Walt Schaefer and I played the whole evening session with Norman and Edgar. We won all the matches, and we won the event.
Oh, man.
So that was the last win for both Kaplan and Kay.
Wow.
And but I wasn't playing with Sydney in that event. I played with him the rest of the week, and we finished second in one of the 2-day national pair events earlier in the week. But so that was a great one.
Mm.
That was a great one. All right, so getting back to Sydney. So Sydney had tons of stories. So and he could tell them. He could tell them. Oops, you're breaking up a little. I don't know if it's my phone or something else.
I think it was a speaker. I was switching off the speaker. I had the speakerphone.
Okay. Because this phone should last a while. So Sydney was incredible. He had what I call the twinkle. There's certain people you run into that have a twinkle in their eye, and it's always there. Well, Sydney was one of those people. And he was one of those people that I've seen somebody else described like this very recently. Yeah, I think it was Jerry Garcia. Yes, I think Jerry Garcia was described like this in something I read about him recently. Somebody described when he first met Jerry Garcia, he could tell that was the kind of person that was about to be immensely amused by whatever was about to happen. Well, Sydney was like that.
Oh man, what a great quality! What a great quality to have in a human being.
Yeah. Well, Jerry Garcia is another one of my personal heroes. So, but Sydney had tons of stories and a lot of and every kind of subject. A lot of them were bridge stories, but a lot of them were not. He was a great man. A great man.
Yeah, Zia's told me about Zia was the first person to really tell me. He didn't tell me much detail, but I just remember him.
He just made the world a better place. I think he made and lost several fortunes before he hung on to the last one. But he was always in oil and gas exploration, stuff like that, stuff that was a little out there.
But you won an event with him, didn't you? Win an event? I think in your Bridge Winners profile it says your favorite.
I won a couple of events with him. Yes, but I won two events with him. The first one was the Risinger in 1997, and that was 2 months after Edgar Kaplan died. Edgar died in September of that year. We won the event I described in March of that year. In September, Kaplan died. And in November, Sydney and I won the Risinger. And we couldn't help thinking that Edgar was looking over our shoulders the whole time. That event was with Steve Garner and Howie Weinstein. Four-handed. Yep. And
you've won each of the major events once, like the Vanderbilt, the Spin Gold.
No, I've never won the Spin Gold.
Never won the Spin Gold.
I've had two brutal losses in the finals, both by small margins, having blown large leads in the finals. Yes, one of those was with Lou Bloom, and another one was with Rich Friesner in Boston in 1981. I've had a lot of great partners over the years. So, and the other event I won with Sydney was the one that's my favorite. That was the Blue Ribbons in Phoenix in 2002, where we were in contention all the way. After we had a big first final, like it was 4 boards over, but Chris Valenkin and Glenn Milgram had a huge game, and they were a board ahead of us. But I think we were a board clear of third. But we had another good game, not that good, but still a game where we knew we were in contention in the last session, and we played the leaders in the last round.
Chris and Glenn?
Yes. And as luck would have it, they were still first and we were still second. But we had an 80% round. We basically got 80% on both boards. And we won. And they dropped to third or fourth. Yeah.
And why is that your favorite event?
Well, we played great. We drove from behind. There was this momentum that just built all day long in the finals. It was with Sydney. And one of my favorite incidents occurred just before that last round. A couple of rounds before that. Now, we were table 13. We were at the end of a row in a 13-table section. And we could see the leaders coming to us. We knew we were going to play them the last round. But a couple of rounds before that, we had played Kit Woolsey and Fred Stewart. And we didn't know it, but they were also having a really good game. They were in contention as well. So then they went around the corner to the start of the other row. So they were a couple of tables away. And now the leaders arrived at our table a couple of minutes early. So we wanted to get started. It was the last round. We knew the room was going to get noisy. So Karen McCallum was kibitzing Kit and Fred. And they were reviewing some hand that they had just played loudly. And she was talking about it loudly at a table that wasn't too far from us. So, the Lankin and Milgram sat down against us, and I said, shh, and she ignored me. And I did it again, even louder, shh, and she ignored me again. So at this point, Sydney stood up and said, could you please shut up? We're playing for the event here. Oh, wow. So I don't know whether the opponents, they knew that we were second going into the session, but now Sydney had just told them, we're still having a good game, boys. And then we crushed them on both boards. And on one of those boards, Flannery came up, one of my favorite conventions, as I told you earlier. It came up for the 5th time that day.
Oh, my goodness.
And we had good boards on all of them.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, that came up on the first board. And on the second board, another one of my pet things came up, which is balanced takeout doubles. I think I mentioned that in my notes to
but I
Michael.
didn't understand what you meant.
Well, I like to make takeout doubles on opening bids. If I have at least 3-card support for all the other suits, I like to make a takeout double. And occasionally I might do it with 4 of the opening bid suit, but usually it's 4 333 with 3 of the opening bid suit. And at least 12 points. I draw the line at 12. Okay, I won't go down to 11.
But you'll make a takeout double of 1 spade with this distribution? With 12 points?
Yes. With 12 points and 3 spades. 4 333.
Okay.
Yes.
Well,
I've been doing it for...
Terribly.
I've been doing it since a lot of people like to do it, yes, but a lot of people don't like to do it. But I've been doing it since the mid-'70s. At that time, I thought this was awful. And I noticed that, my opponents keep getting away with it. My opponents are doing this and getting away with it.
Right.
So as an experiment, I decided to try it. And I got away with it. I had a great result. So I said, well, maybe there's something to it. I think I'll keep trying it. And I kept getting good results. So I never stopped. So one of those came up on the very last board of the event. And where it went, I won't go into details. But
okay.
the opponents had a chance to salvage the board. If we had stayed out of the auction, they would have gotten to 5 clubs, which was cold. But by making the takeout double, I prevented my left-hand opponent from showing an invitational hand with clubs. If I passed, he would have invited in clubs right now.
Right.
Okay, but when I made a takeout double, he couldn't do that anymore, and their auction went off the rails, and they stopped at a part score. So we had 80% boards on both boards. You know, on the first board after Flannery, we reached a 21-point game and made it.
Oh my gosh!
So this is my favorite win, where we drove from, we played well the whole time. We drove from behind, crushed the leaders on the last round, and won the event. and I could tell in the room where this happened that the whole room was happy for us, especially for Sydney. Especially for Sydney. You know, he was at that time in 2002, he had just turned 72. So he was old.
Yeah.
He was old to be winning an event like that had a stamina requirement, and stamina wasn't really one of his strengths.
Yeah.
It was just fantastic. It was fantastic. So, and also in the first session, the first final, we had a bidding hand that won prize for the best bid hand of the year. You know, there's awards every year for the best bid hand, the best play hand, the best defended hand.
Yeah.
So I've won 2 of those. I won the best bid hand, which was with Sydney in that event, in our big session, our 66% game. But we got the 7-0 trump on a completely natural auction, except the only unnatural bid was when Sydney Q bid a void. Every other bid in the auction was natural. And the last several bids were all offers to play. They weren't Q bids. They were contracts. And so that got the best bid hand of the year that year. So that was nice. And it was in an event we won. And it was an auction that everybody could understand. It was all natural. So that was wonderful. I won the defense award as well, even though I have a reputation as a great declarer. The 2 awards I've won are the best bid hand, and the best defended hand. And in both cases, they were partnership efforts. Best bid hand ought to be a partnership effort. Best defended hand sometimes could be a solo effort, but that one was with Mark Feldman a few years later, where we each made significant plays on the same hand, and both plays were necessary to beat it was Roy Welland in what should have been a cold contract in the late stages of the team trials one year.
Did Mark also share that honor with you as well?
Yes. Yes, those were both partnership honors. Yeah. Well, I mean, all 4 of us deserved it. Yeah. So getting back to Sydney, so we started playing in '95 and had immediate success, and continued playing until Sydney got too old to play as well as he liked to play. He began to lose it in subtle ways and in ways that he personally couldn't tolerate. I could have tolerated it for as long as he wanted to do it, but he couldn't tolerate it. So our partnership lasted we had a strong result as late as '07, and that was another great one. It was in the team trials, and we had a a professional team headed by Simone Deutsch. He was playing with young John Kraniak. They had never played together before. And our other pair was Grant Bays and Gary Kohler. So there's some good players on this team, but my partnership with Sydney was the only one that you could call a regular partnership.
Yeah.
But I knew from long experience that Sydney was going to beg out of playing some of the sessions that he should have been playing because he wasn't going to feel up to it.
Mm.
So I drafted an emergency partnership with John Kraniak. We had never played before, but I got in touch with him before the event and told him that we should fill out a card just in case Sydney doesn't feel like playing, to let him take some time off when he wants to. So we did that. It was a simple card, but good enough. And Simone, I don't know how much you know about him, but he was not a great player, but he was an effective player. He was a very old-fashioned player, but he had a way about him. He really, really brought out the best in his partners and his teammates. He was a joy to play for. There are sponsors out there that don't do that. They do the opposite. And there's a lot of sponsors that are kind of neutral that way. But Simone really got the most out of his teams with great regularity. And this was such an occasion. So we beat a few teams that I think were favored to beat us, including one that had Levin and Weinstein. And eventually we played Nickel in the semifinals of the team trials. And early on, we got a roll going and got up about 50. But these are long matches, 120 board matches. So we were up 50 after 2 or 3 segments, and they started pecking away. And eventually they were up about 40, and with 1 segment to go. And in the last set, we put the big scare into them. They were quaking in their boots coming down the stretch, but finally they pulled it out. We had a lot of great results, but we couldn't quite finish the job. And they won by about 15 or 20. At one point, I think we were within 1 swing. So that was Sydney's last great event. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, he was a wonderful man. He was just in every respect possible. He had tons of stories, and he would tell them all the time. He was one of my driving companions. I like to drive for fun, and Sydney liked to drive with me for fun. And I think one of the reasons it was fun for him was because I was having fun, and we would listen to my music. I'm a huge fan of that old time rock and roll. That's not really Sydney's cup of tea, but through me, he got to love that kind of music in sort of the same way I did. I would tell him about the songs, most of which he didn't know, and he would. I think he got to understand what it was about them that I loved. So we would listen to music and we would tell stories, and I would do my animal driving because I'm a hyper aggressive driver, but always while being safe. And he was never scared driving with me. Some people are scared driving with me, but Sydney was always completely confident in my driving, even when I was doing some things that should have been scaring him. So we had driving adventures. Where was I? I lost the thread here.
I have a question. I need to wrap this up, but I have a question for you.
Okay.
In double dummy in the semifinals of the World Youth Team Championship under 21, the team that we were following
was down 56 imps at the half. They were playing 56 boards. What would you compare that to in a basketball game? 56 imps at the half, or a football game for that matter. What would you say is a comparable score?
Okay, 56 imps at the half of a 64 board match.
56 board match.
56 board match. Okay. It's doable, but you really got to get it together. So that's in a basketball game. It's like down 20 at the half. Yeah, doable, but you better get on it. And in football, it's down maybe 14 or 17. Yeah, that's my feel, comparing it to other sports. In baseball, it's like being down, the 3 or 4 runs in the 7th inning.
All right, Bart. I'm gonna thank you so much.
As you can tell, I could go on indefinitely.
All right. Well, I'm gonna stop it. You're welcome to keep going, but I'm gonna hang on.
Okay. Well, if you don't have enough material and you want to continue at some point, just let me know.
All right. I think we have plenty. That's not to say that maybe we won't get together another occasion down the road, because it's been a treat. You've really lived up to the advanced billing. So thank you so much for sharing.
I'd like to at some point put in a word from my father, who started teaching me to play when I was 5 and died when I was 10. But I was already a junkie, and I have been all my life. So, you can use that.
And what was your father's name?
Arthur.
Arthur Bramley.
Right. That's right. I can't judge really how good he was, but in my mind, he was a great player. So anyway, that's another topic, and I could go on a long time on that one, but I wanted to mention that.
Well, thank you. I also thank you. I lost my father young as well.
Well, my father was 44. I was 10. And I have a lot of sympathy with people who lost parents young. It's devastating. Yeah, that's the worst thing that ever happened to me. But I'm happy to say that nothing that bad has ever happened since. Including losing my mother, who at least had a very long and eventful life. She just died 2 years ago. She was 96. She was. Both my parents were sensational. And I love my family. Not everybody can say that, but I do. Anyway.
All right. Well, thank you
Put
very
that in
much.
there.
That seems like
Put that in there if you can.
That seems like a good place to finish. Yeah,
okay.
that for sure. For sure.
Okay. And if you can extend that to Judy, my wife. All right. Thanks, John. This was a real pleasure. And I'm happy to spread the word.
All right. Thank you, Bart.
Okay. Bye now.
Good night.
One of my favorite things about talking to Bart was just how thorough he was in his ability to remember and share really incisive details as a storyteller, and how he wouldn't forget. Like, we would go off on some other topic, and then he would remember and be able to come back to the original thread. So it was a pleasure. I know Bart enjoyed it. He sent me some really nice emails in response. I think we're going to be able to publish an email that Bart shared with me and Michael Zhu, our intern. Thank you, Michael. You're doing a great job. I think we're going to publish that on Bridge Winners. It's a story about the par contest, in which Bart finished second, and Michael's idol, Michael Rosenberg, came first. So that's, I think we're going to have that on Bridge Winners. And the last thing I want to do is we've got transcripts for the show. We're using a service called Go-To Transcript. They gave us a deal, thanks to Michael's shrewd bargaining, but they're not a sponsor yet. So maybe they'll come on as a sponsor because we left their logo on the transcripts because they do such a nice job. Anyway, that's it for this week. Like I said at the beginning, I love hearing from you all. It's great to have Michael on the show as an intern. I got some feedback from another listener via email today. And I'm really enjoying doing this. So thank you for everybody that's supporting the show.